My parents are currently giving me half of the allowance that they usually do, and my cousin, whom I stood up for, is responsible for this. Have you ever been in or seen a situation whereby you're painted black by your family because you do not share their views? Well, that's my situation. I come from a family where religion and religious activity are all, they live for. I'm the first of 2 boys and a girl, which my parents have, and I've never hidden my distaste for any disinterest in religious practices. My parents forced me to participate in them during my early years, but as I grew older, I also grew wilder and proved too stubborn for them to handle. I did not intentionally choose to be a pain in their butts, though. I chose to live my life in a way that they did not approve. My parents discovered my teenage indulgences when I graduated from high school. I had come home with an alcoholic drink in my bag on the day that we had our graduation party. I'd taken a few shots before coming home, and my siblings were in church, and I was wasted. And by that I mean that the effect of the drink kicked in, thereby making me too tired and drowsy, so I slept straight away. I was awoken by 3 hours later by the sound of my parents' loud voice, which was an indication that they were mad about something. I opened my eyes to see them standing over me with the drink in their hands, and I knew I was toast. My parents would have roasted me alive if they could have. Only somebody from a religious home can understand the implications of being caught smuggling an alcoholic drink into the house. My parents immediately called my Aunt Ruth and her husband, who were higher up in the religious ladder than them. My parents did not tell them what I've done. They just told them there was an emergency. With the way they presented the matter, you would think my crime was so grievous. Well, in a religious home, I guess it was. Aunt Ruth and her husband came over to the house as fast as they could, and my parents disclosed to them my atrocity. Aunt Ruth and her husband's reaction was pretty epic. They asked how I could desecrate the home by bringing an alcoholic content in, and I said nothing. I just stood there for them to bash at me, and they asked why I was not setting a solid example for my younger siblings, just like Dylan was doing. Dylan is now their eldest son, and he's the perfect representation of what every religious person would want their child to be. He was a little older than me and was already in college, but he never missed a religious activity when he was around. Almost every parent in the religious circle hailed my aunt and her husband for bringing up such a model child like that. My parents went ahead to express to Aunt Ruth and her husband their deepest fears. They noted that if I could act like this while I was still at home with them, what would I do when I was off in college and living on my own? My aunt and her husband noted that I was, going to do the absolute unbelievable. Then they suggest that my parents register me at the same college as their son Dylan attended, so that by doing so he could keep a watchful eye over me and be a positive influence in my life. My parents made the suggestion without wasting any time, and they had me apply for college right away, which was not what I would have wanted if it were up to me. I get admitted into college, and rather than rent an apartment for me, my parents informed me that I was going to be living with Dylan. Dylan came back home 3 days before I was to go to school. His parents and mine had agreed that he would be the one to take me to school and help me get settled in. I had never been close to Dylan before then, and the idea of living with him did not sit well with me. I did not want someone who would be acting as a spy on my parents and keeping them updated about every breath that I took. Dylan's display of religious the day we were to leave for school made me know for certain that I was going to have the worst college experience ever. He had to come pick me up from my house. And I had said goodbye to my parents, who gave me all kinds of advice and warnings. I was about to leave when Dylan asked if I had packed my Bible. His question caught the attention of everyone, and I could feel my parents in his eyes looking intently at me. I knew that if I told the truth that I had not carried it because I didn't want to and because I couldn't even find it, I would be grilled. But I could not lie as they could ask to see it, so I simply told the truth. Well, half of it. I noted that I could not find my Bible anywhere, and my parents reacted the way I expected. Dylan did not let my parents express their disappointment for long. He interrupted them by saying he was going to give me one of the numerous Bibles that he had in school. His response seemed to please everyone, except for me. It proved to my parents and me that he was the right man for the job. We left the house and headed for school, and Dylan tried establishing conversation along the way, but I was so not interested. I was busy contemplating how boring the next few years were going to be for me. It was not the kind of life that I had envisioned, and I don't want you to misunderstand that statement. I never had it in my mind to be irresponsible in school. I just wanted a life that was less religious and where I had my own liberties. Dylan and I arrived at his apartment, and I could tell from the outside that there was someone in there. Dylan just twisted the knob, and we both got inside to see a lady who was scantily clad. I initially thought that we had gotten into the wrong apartment, and I expected Dylan to apologize for barging in and almost, to a naked lady. But she walked up to him with a smile face and shared a kiss. I'm talking about the religious Dylan. Knowing full well that I was stunned at the drama that was playing out before my eyes, Dylan turned to me and introduced me to his girlfriend. He went on to tell me that he knew his parents would not let him live life how he wanted, so he was using the religion thing as a cover. He told me that right there on campus, nobody was going to pressure me into being somebody I didn't want to be. The discovery that Dylan was someone else entirely was so shocking. Besides the lady who was present, his apartment was littered with bottles of beer and some residues of cigars. I was beginning to get exposed to the wildlife, but it was clear Dylan had been living there for a very long time. All the same, I was relieved to know that he was not going to parent me the way my parents expected. I soon discovered that the lady whom Dylan had introduced as his girlfriend was one of the numerous girls who came looking for him every week. He changed them like he changed his socks. The whole thing picked up my curiosity, and I found myself asking him how he could manage so many ladies in his life without being emotionally attached and fully committed to just one. Dylan laughed and said it was wrong for a guy to get tied to one girl alone, as ladies were made for fun. Well, I did disagree with his mindset, though, and I did not outright say so. He then asked if there were any women in my life, and I told him no, even though there was a girl in my class whom I've had my eyes on. Dylan was curious to see this girl that I was speaking of, and he showed up at my class the next day. After I pointed her out, he goes by and says, her name's Deborah. He advised that chasing after girls like that was a waste of time, and I just wanted to know his reason for saying so, but he told me he was talking from experience and it's best to just be friends with her from a distance. I took Dylan's advice and discontinued my pursuit of Deborah. Although we spoke when necessary, and that was only in class, I could tell from the few times we discussed, however, that Deborah had a great personality. Things in school began to get a bit hectic, and it was not unusual to find students missing class. Deborah was in this category. I, on the other hand, did not want to start my freshman year with bad grades, so I tried pushing myself to lecture. One day, however, I left during lectures as I needed a bit of a rest. I go to the apartment to find Dylan lying down on the bed with just his pants on while a lady was preparing a dish. Well, I was used to the sight by now, and it was clear that they had just had a session. The lady came out of the kitchen, and I froze. It was Deborah. Deborah had not been missing classes because life as a freshman was not as overwhelming for her as I thought. She was missing classes because she was spending time with my cousin, Dylan. Dylan told me that Deborah was his girlfriend, and I tried hiding my emotion while she was around, even though it was so difficult. I endured their display of affection while nursing anger on the inside towards Dylan. He had taken the girl whom he discouraged me from chasing. I watched in anger as he enjoyed every bit of affection, and my anger was mostly because I knew Dylan was only after her for, what he could get. This was somebody who had told me that he found commitment to a single girl to be stupid. Deborah finally left, and I wasted no time in confronting Dylan. He apologized and said Deborah was the one who had been coming after him, and he didn't want to tell me as he knew I might feel bad. I knew Dylan's excuse was crap, but I just let the matter slide. The semester was over and we had to go home for a few weeks. Dylan immediately transformed back into his old religious lover everyone knew. I didn't bother putting up a show. I still avoided religious activities as much as I possibly could. The Valentine's period coincided with the holiday. I visited Dylan as I usually do, and during our discussion I asked what he was going to do for Deborah on Valentine's Day. And he said nothing. I kind of observed that he was no longer as enthusiastic about her as he was at the beginning of their relationship. It was as though he was now avoiding her. I minded my business and I went home, and Dylan invited me over to his house 2 days later, and he said that he had thought about what I said and decided to send his lover some gifts on Valentine's. He began showing me the things that he had gotten her, and among which were a teddy bear and some sexy lingerie. We had a nice time together, and I left, and I had barely gotten home when he called me to tell me that his parents were going to come to my house the next day, to scold me for persisting in an immoral life. I knew Dylan's parents would not just make such a statement without having seen or heard something, so I asked Dylan what they heard this time around, and Dylan said it was not about me, but rather about him. It still did not make sense to me until he began to, explain himself. He said that after I left, his parents had seen the gifts that he's gotten for Deborah, and they were about to bite his head off, so he came up with a lie right there on the spot. Dylan had told his parents that I had come with gifts earlier in the day, and they were items that I wanted to give my girlfriend Deborah. He told them that Deborah was my girlfriend. He went on to say that he told his parents he had talked to me out of doing so, and that's why I had left the gifts at his place. He told his parents that he was in the process of making me quit my relationship with Deborah. But his parents decided that they still need to caution me and alert my parents about it. Dylan pleaded with me to just please play along, as my parents were more tolerable than this. His parents could end his college pursuits if they discovered the kind of life that he was truly leading, whereas my parents would only shout at me as they usually did. As I listened to Dylan, I found it surprising that he had been caught by his parents, because it was unlike him to be oh so careless, and although it would have been fitting revenge to blow his cover for making me quit chasing Deborah, only started to date him. I decided to just play along. He promised he would not let the matter escalate beyond his parents coming to my house and making a scene, and his parents did drive there to the house the next day with Dylan and the items, and you can imagine the kind of drama that ensued. I was called upon and asked who the heck Deborah was. I was already anticipating the moment, and I had prepared what my response would be before then. Just as Dylan and I discussed, I told them that they were items I wanted to send my girlfriend Deborah on Valentine's Day, but Dylan had talked me out of it, and I equally said that he had been encouraging me for some time to end things with her and just focus on my studies. And after his advice the previous day, I intended to do so, and I received heat from all sides. My parents asked why I had gotten into a relationship with a girl in the first place, and Dylan's parents then noted that it was a good thing that I had in my life to watch over me was Dylan. If only they knew the truth of the matter. Dylan joined the list of those who took a swipe at me, and he was more painful. He told my parents that I was getting a lot more allowance than was needed for a freshman student, and that's why I had money to engage in frivolities. He then went on to suggest to my parents that they reduce my allowance, so I could not have enough to indulge in immorality. I was shocked at Dylan's suggestion. It was in no way part of the deal, and he, said that he would ensure the matter did not escalate, but this was equal to wrecking me. My parents agreed to his suggestion, and my father decided he was going to slash my allowance by 50%. I confront Dylan later on, and it was enough that I was taking the heat for him, so he did not need to suggest it to my parents. Dylan apologized and said it was all part of the show. He did promise to make up for it by giving me something out of his monthly allowance. I'm currently grounded in my house and cannot receive a visitor, besides Dylan. Update number 1. Hey guys, there's been some funny happenings in the past few days. Deborah had suddenly begun getting friendly with me. I know we're friends even though I was not able to make her my girlfriend, but this is so different. She had been making some uncomfortable advances, the kind of lovey gestures you make when you have butterflies in your stomach for someone. She could post a picture of me in her status and write some comments which I found disturbing. She suddenly started calling me at really odd hours, and there was nothing useful that she had to say. I did not tell Dylan about this, and I tried my best to make sure I never reciprocated her gestures. Dylan soon questioned me one of the days when I went to his house, and he asked if something was going on between Deborah and I. I laughed, before telling him there wasn't, and he still was not convinced, and even went to say that he had been observing the way that she had been giving me the attention of late, and it was clear to him that the fire that was between them was no longer as it was before. I reassured him I had no intention of taking his girl, which should have been my girl if he had not played a smart move on me. I felt he was now convinced about the situation, but I was wrong. The next time I visit Dylan, while I was there, his phone began to ring. It was Deborah, but Dylan refused to pick up the call. He would sigh or just put up a face each time it rang, and I suspected something was wrong. I asked what it was, and he told me that he's broken up with his lover that morning because he felt that she was cheating. I asked if he had any proof of what he was saying, and he said the only proof he had was that she no longer had his time. I felt he could make mistakes for me, for the one that had captured his girl's heart, because she was still doing the same thing that she had done before, so I decided to do something about it. I called Deborah to talk to her. I told her in a mature way to quit the friendly gestures that she was sending my way as her lover, who was her lover and, broken the relationship because he felt jealous. I made Deborah understand that nothing was ever going to happen between the two of us, because even if she was no longer with Dylan, I don't think I would fancy the idea of dating my cousin's ex. She got the memo and stopped the advances, and Dylan, however, has recently been trying to get me to hook up with Deborah. I think it was the day after I told Deborah to quit what she was doing. Dylan's tried to convince me that he was okay with me dating her and that he would not take offense in any way. I was still maintaining my stand, though. Update number 2. It was a terrible idea to have initially claimed that Deborah was my lover. I should have just let Dylan deal with this mess himself, but my willingness to cover his butt has gotten me into deep crap. My school has resumed, but I have yet to go back. I don't see myself going back anytime soon, and I was in my room 3 days ago, packing my stuff, so I could go back to school by the weekend when my phone rang. It was Dylan, and there was trouble. He told me there was a Deborah situation, and no matter what my parents said, I was to keep quiet as he was going to fix it. Dylan did not give me the substantial information I needed. He had cut the call short before I could make inquiries. So I wondered what the heck the problem was this time around. I was still packing my bags when my father waltzed into my room. He asked when I intended to go to school, and I knew there was a problem. He was aware I was supposed to go back by the weekend, and I repeated what I had told him before about my resumption, and he asked if I was going to school to read or start up a family with my lover Deborah, whom I've gotten pregnant. The talk of pregnancy hit me like a fan, and I was still trying to figure out what to say when my visibly angry father told me he was not going to sponsor my academics. I tried calling Dylan the moment my father left the room, but he wasn't answering. I messaged him on Instagram. I needed some explanation to know the next step because I would not suffer the magnitude of punishment my father wanted to heap on me while continued with the education no more. He told me not to get worked up and that Deborah was only trying to use the pregnancy to get him back. He said I was to tell my parents the pregnancy was a lie, and he would go back to school in a few days to make her call the parents and just relay the story of the truth. So, I was relieved to hear that the pregnancy claim was a lie. I wanted to see my father to tell him about it, but he had already left. My parents came back in the evening, and they did not come alone. They came with Dylan's parents and our pastor. I was summoned before the Council of Butchers, and Dylan's mother began talking about how she had overheard her son talking to somebody over the phone, and the mention of pregnancy had caught her attention. It was when she asked him about it that he said Deborah was on the other end of the phone, and she was telling Dylan that I was avoiding her after I have gotten her pregnant. I didn't know what to say, and to be honest, I was tired. What started with me just lying that his girlfriend was my girl was about to cost me my entire education. I was about to speak when Dylan showed up. I was glad that he did. Well, he was lucky he was there, because I've blown the whole thing up, and he immediately spoke up and said that the whole thing was nothing more than a hoax. He said that Deborah lied about being pregnant because I followed his advice to break with her, and she was not happy about it, and she wanted to use a pregnancy scare to make us come back together. The pastor then spoke up and said that although it was a relief that my quote girlfriend wasn't pregnant, I was not supposed to have even gotten entangled with her in the first place. He talked about how I had been setting a bad example for my siblings and causing my parents heartache in the process. He equally talked about the likely consequences of my actions if I persisted in not taking religious and activities seriously, before admonishing me to follow in the footsteps of old Dylan, who lived an exemplary life. The matter ended with me still taking another hit for Dylan, and Dylan went back to school yesterday, but he promised to make sure that Deborah calls. Well, my parents do apologize for the stunt that she pulled, as my parents are insisting that they must see or hear from her. Update number 3. Humans are terrible. My cousin Dylan is even worse. He had gone back to school before me, and part of the reasons was so that he could make Deborah call my parents or come down to our house to apologize for the pregnancy stunt, which had almost cost me my education. However, nothing was done, and there was still some form of tension between me and my parents. I tried reaching out to Dylan, but he was not picking up the phone, so I was left with no other option than to call Deborah. I reached out to her and wanted to get her updated on everything that's been going on. I told her that I had covered up for Dylan with the claim that she was my girlfriend to prevent his overly strict parents from chopping his head off. So, when she came up with the lie about the pregnancy, it hit the relationship between my parents and me very hard. I asked her to come and talk to my parents, who would only allow me to go back to school after the apology was made. Just to be sure, but Deborah said she would not do it. She noted that she was pregnant, and advised that I come clean with my family because she was going to keep the child. I asked her if Dylan was aware of the pregnancy claim being actually true, and she noted that he was. I hung up the call immediately and began trying to reach out to Dylan again, saying something did not seem right. How could he claim that the pregnancy news was fake all along when he knew the truth? Dylan did not pick up my call, and he refused to reply to my messages, which made me suspect that he was avoiding me. I wanted to leave my house to go and confront him in school, but I could not. I wanted to tell my parents the truth about the whole matter, but I decided to hold off a little just so I could be certain Dylan was playing me. Deborah showed up surprisingly early at my house earlier today when my family members were in church. I had wanted her to come to apologize to my parents when they were around, not when I was all alone. I asked her to leave, but she insisted that I would want to hear what she had to say. Deborah began telling me that Dylan had been playing me all along. He had discovered she was pregnant before the vacation and asked her to get rid of the baby, as he could not afford his parents to learn that he had impregnated someone. She was scared at the prospect of getting rid of the baby because of the implications if things went wrong, so she declined. She said Dylan had asked her to attempt wooing me so she could sleep with me while the pregnancy was in its infancy, and then pin it on me. The way, was why she had been posting my pictures and making subtle moves at me. However, after I told her nothing could happen between us, she told Dylan she was tired of the whole thing and wanted him to take responsibility and be a father, and he shouted at her over the phone. That's when his mom overheard the pregnancy talk, which he still managed to evade somehow, and he's been trying to give her, to get rid of the baby ever since he returned to school. But her refusal had made him act hostile towards her, and that's why she had decided to come clean. I asked Deborah to go home and return tomorrow, which was the weekend and when my parents would finally be around. Final update. I've gotten my payback, but I'm still not really satisfied. I still feel Dylan hasn't paid enough. How could he attempt to pin his girlfriend's pregnancy on me? Deborah came to the house the next day when my parents were around, and I had my parents give us an audience. I started from scratch by telling them that Dylan, who they wanted me to be alike, was a fraud and a manipulator who would do anything to maintain his image, no matter how terrible it was or who was affected. I then told them the hard truth. Deborah was Dylan's girlfriend and he got her pregnant. My parents were shocked by my words, and Deborah added to their shock with her own words. She told them all that's been happening, and my parents, after listening to her, decided to deal with the situation accordingly. They told Dylan's parents, who refused to believe what was said until they heard it from their own son. So they summoned him back home. Dylan had been avoiding me all along, but he knew better than to avoid his parents. Our families met with Deborah, and I was present in the meeting, and I repeated the exact same thing that I said before and exposed his little secret lifestyle. Told them all about Deborah, who was present and was not my girlfriend but his. Deborah supported my claim, but Dylan wanted to deny it, including the pregnancy. Deborah immediately suggested that a DNA test be carried out after childbirth to ascertain if Dylan was responsible for the pregnancy or not, and that's when Dylan bowed his head in shame while admitting he was responsible. His parents were mad with rage, and his father actually attacked him physically while his mom's aunt, Ruth, rolled on the floor. My parents left with me, and they wasted no time informing the pastor about the said situation. This was because the whole church had labeled me as a failure after they heard the news about me and my girlfriend. Although my parents were glad to not be in the shameful situation of me, they scolded me for trying to cover up for Dylan. I've returned to school with my full allowance, and my parents have rented a new apartment for me. As for Dylan, he's currently not talking to me. But that's not the sweet part. His parents, who have met with Deborah's family and noted that their son would be taking full responsibility of the child, have made him put his school on hold to get a job and make sure that the needs of his old baby mama and his child are met.